Kimberly, we're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and just introduce you here. Kimberly is going to be talking about building a strong connection with your partner. That's what she'll be sharing with us today. And Kimberly is a licensed psychotherapist providing client care, clinical supervision, and clinical consultation in the fields of sex therapy and trauma therapy. So Kimberly, would you go ahead and just share a little bit maybe about your story, just to give us some context? And then we do have quite a few questions and we can jump right into those as well.
Sure. Yeah. When you say story, do you mean like professional training or more personal kind of journey into this part of the field or?
Yeah. What are you comfortable sharing a little bit of your personal journey?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's helpful. I'm very passionate about being here, and I think there's probably not an emotion that you're all feeling that I haven't had myself. So it's really just an honor to be here and be a resource and be a support, because it brings up a lot of emotion, and a lot of memories for me from what I went through myself. So it's just a really great opportunity. And when I was going through this, when the speakers met kind of before, when we were preparing, all of us were reflecting that nothing like this was available when we were doing it. So it can be a very isolating experience. So I just want to again thank Melissa for putting this together, knowing how much time it takes to prepare these kind of things. It's awesome. So so my background, I'll just give you a little snippet on my professional background. I'm a licensed professional counselor in South Dakota, and I've been in private practice for over 10 years. I'm ASEC certified sex therapist and EMDRIA certified EMDR therapist, which is a type of trauma therapy. I do other trauma modalities, and I also am Gottman couples therapist. So some of the interventions I might share today deal with or are references to Gottman interventions, because I think those are really easy things to learn on your own if you're not going to therapy. So I'm going to share some of those things. Under the field of sex therapy is very broad, but there is kind of under the umbrella of that is the infertility counseling. And so our team has done training on infertility counseling over the years. I've been a member of the ASRM, which is the professional organization for kind of the more on the medical side of infertility work. And it's just an area that I think that there are very few resources, and the reality is that the technologies are so new and they keep getting more expansive and in depth and more costly, I think, every year. So the burden, and it can be very overwhelming when you start, because there's so many questions to be answered, and the cost is overwhelming, and there's places you can go, and so I'm really happy to answer questions on that as well. General kind of questions about starting the process. But in terms of my personal story, so I'm going to be, it's ironic, I'm talking about the partner side of things today, but I actually went through my infertility journey as a single mother by choice. I do work extensively with couples, and I love working with couples because I love to see people love each other. It's really a beautiful thing when people can work through things and deepen their relationship. But I had a son with my partner at the time, and then that relationship didn't work for a variety of reasons. We're still friends, and I'm, my son and I are involved with his paternal grandparents and that whole family. So it's a good relation. But when that relationship ended, I was about maybe 38, I would say. And I was at this point where I was like, well, okay, I could spend a couple of years trying to find the right person, and then I get into my 40s, and what am I going to do? Or I was like, well, my first son has a diagnosis of Down syndrome, and so I know as you get older, the chances of having, children that have genetic abnormalities is higher. Your eggs do age, like a geriatric pregnancy, they call it. So I just made the very bold decision after, actually, I spent a couple years in my own psychotherapy with the founder of Single Mothers by Choice. And I decided to kind of go it on my own. So I went through 2 rounds of IVF, one here in Sioux Falls and one in Denver. So I have different experiences at different clinics. And it taught me a tremendous amount about my biology, my reproductive system, my body, my own emotional and mental ability to have stamina, maintain hope. And I have 2 beautiful twin girls who are turning 5 in about a month, and they're gorgeous. And no matter where you're at, having a child, whether it's through your own, if it would have been through egg donation, which was recommended to me at one point, if it's through adoption, is a beautiful, beautiful thing, no matter how much work it takes to get there. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing is kind of being like your hope merchant today, because staying positive and working towards your dreams is critical, I think, with this, and not giving in to all the negative thoughts and fears that can be swirling around. So, yeah, is that a good introduction, Melissa?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you very much for being open about that. And I love that how you said being a hope merchant. I think that's a great way to just jump right into we got some great questions from people. And so thank you for everyone who did send a question in. So we'll kind of go through. So this one here is my husband is very upbeat, positive person. He doesn't like talking about hard, painful topics. So what help them? What do they do, right? We've got 2 different kind of personalities here. She's like, I need to process what we're going through, but it's hard to talk to him about it.
Yeah. Okay. This is great. So as I approach it, I've read all these questions and I prepared some ideas, but I would really invite everybody. I know it's kind of hard because some people like to remain anonymous, but I would really invite conversation, because I have a feeling all these questions on here show up in relationships in one form or another, even if it's not for infertility reasons.
Yeah.
So off the bat, I just want to say, in my experience of being a couples therapist for a long time now, whenever a couple, a system goes through a stress, which infertility is a tremendous stress, it's going to bring out things that were already there to a greater degree. So these things, all the questions and things we're going to be talking about, might not just be about infertility. So I want to reframe this as an opportunity for your relationship to get stronger. Like, this is kind of like the challenge of this chapter of your life, but it's really an opportunity for your relationship to get stronger for the rest of your life, because you're going to be able to learn how to deal with that particular obstacle as a couple. And that's really what creating a good long-term relationship is about, is how are we going to navigate these obstacles we have interpersonally, emotionally. So that's just, I want to kind of preface all my answers with that. So look at it as an opportunity. So when I hear this question, what I see, I'm always reading between the lines, is that you have people that are, what I would say, at different levels of what I'd call emotional intimacy. And so what I did is, I'm going to kind of, if it's okay, Melissa, just share some different things through a screen share. That I can also list as resources. And this is something that I would do with clients. So there is a book called The 7 Levels of Intimacy. Ooh, it says I'm disabled from screen sharing, which is okay. If you can't do it, I can just talk through it.
No, I will make you a co-host here, Kimberly, and then you should be able to screen share. So I just made you one.
Okay, perfect. So this is a book that actually, it was written a while ago, but it's called The 7 Levels of Intimacy. And what I would say is that, and you can all think about your relationships. And sometimes when I meet with a couple where I can tell things are kind of on the surface, I might just say, let's look at this index. And I want you to tell me, as we go through these levels, where the majority of your conversations exist. So are they kind of in the cliches, like, how was your day? Oh, it was a walk in the park. You know, is it facts like, oh, it was okay. Went and had lunch with Josh today. You know, is it opinions? The day was was it was okay. There was some, you know, issues with how my boss was with, you know, handling a conflict at work or something. You know, is it hopes and dreams? Um, you know, I really uh, you know, had this idea about, you know, wanting to really exercise and have this great workout, and I did that, and I just feel awesome today, you know. And obviously I'm just kind of making these up on the fly. So
Yeah.
is it about feelings? Oh my gosh, today was so overwhelming. I got to work and Janine was there, and she was talking about how her mother died, and it triggered all these feelings I had about when my mom died last year, and I went to the bathroom and I cried for like an hour. You know, is it like going into depth about feelings? Is it fears? So some of the most difficult things to express, you know, as we go down in these levels are fears, failures, needs. Most couples that I start with are somewhere up in here, and through therapy, and maybe if you were lucky enough to grow up in families where these skills were taught, which is usually where people learn how to communicate, you know, you're somewhere down here. Like, I really need for you to help me around the house because I'm exhausted, and it really hurts my feelings when I've asked you 10 times and nothing changes. Or I'm really afraid that, you know, when you spend a lot of time with your friends, that I don't matter to you. You know, that's something else. So when you ask this question of like, my husband is upbeat, and I'll stop the share there. But so this is just one example. Obviously, anything I share today is not going to be the be all end all, but I wanted to throw out some resources that people could go and look at, because this is a book you could sit down and read with your partner easily. So in terms of the question, you know, if my husband is positive and doesn't like to talk about painful topics and I need to process, I would say the emotional intimacy in the relationship hasn't quite been developed, and the friendship hasn't quite been developed to the point where that's happening. And that can be for 100 different reasons. And it also can be because it's a really hard thing that's going on, which kind of raises the stakes a little bit. There's inherently more conflict or possibly more intense emotions. And so I would say the first thing is, you know, talk to people in your life about it. If that's not effective, pick up a book, try to learn something online yourself. If that's not effective, then that's why I have a job, is because we can help people get to these deeper levels of emotional intimacy and friendship. And that's not just about infertility, that's about life, that's about everything. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, well, here's a good question. What percentage of the time should we be in each level of intimacy? It's not practical to obviously always, right? That's always doesn't exist. Always or never is not words that we can apply all the time. So anyway, go ahead, and you want to maybe answer that one, Kimberly? Did you see that one there?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for asking questions. This is going to be fun if everybody kind of chips in. So I would say it varies by couple. You know, it's really about what each person wants and needs. And sometimes there's a discrepancy, so there has to be a negotiation. But I know couples that are quite content living in different parts of the country and having weekend kind of connections, you know, every so often, and they can have happy marriages. I also know couples that work together, raise children together, live together 24/7, that, have, are going to be involved in, like, in my world as a sex therapist, maybe they're into tantric retreats and they talk about their feelings all day long. And then there's others that maybe just need to talk about things when there's a conflict so they can resolve it. So it's very unique to the person, and it should be what feels good to you. But the main thing is that if things are getting bottled up, and that's creating depression, anxiety, interpersonal stress, then there needs to be kind of going deeper and talking through things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we did have another great question here too, Kimberly, about, oh wait, a couple here came in. There's maybe a resentment coming up, which yes, I know that can definitely happen. So they're just kind of asking, how do I manage that? Because like I said, it's already a difficult journey, right? Like we're already dealing with something very difficult, and then you add these other feelings on top of it.
Yeah. So resentment, that's a good one, because resentments can happen for all kinds of reasons. Resentment to me, in general, would be, and you can, correct me if I'm not conceptualizing this the right way, but because I think it was, the person that asked. I just wanted to make sure that, oops, need to get out of here. I accidentally pushed something. So now I push participants.
Oh, there you go. Did you click back on it?
Okay.
Right.
Okay, there, now I'm out of it, sorry. So resentments could be, to me, there's something that happens when an issue has been bubbling for a while. Usually when something happens one time, it could be like a problem, a conflict. Resentment kind of, to me, signifies it's something that never got worked out. And a lot of times the resentments get stronger and stronger the longer it goes. So I would say there has to be that ability to sit down and really talk about, what is it about? Is it about, and I just want to look at the question again. Was the resentment, okay, so the question is about the husband being resentful towards her. I think in the question, we don't really know what the resentment is about. And maybe the person asking doesn't know what it's about. And so there would need to be just sitting down and talking about, I've noticed some resentment, or what I perceive as resentment from you. Would you be willing to share with me what's been bothering you, or if something's bothering you? And that is this is kind of the art of communication as well, because sometimes people can go into it with like, you've been a real a-hole, what's your problem? Which doesn't really help grease the wheels towards a good communication. So that's another thing about learning healthy communication. How do I say things to invite a connection and a productive conversation? And so I would say communication skills is a big thing, and then being able to just bridge that question with a partner. And then from there, you can kind of work towards figuring it out. So it's a broad answer without knowing a lot of the details.
Yeah. No, I think but communication, right? Like you said, I can even say for myself, whenever we would have tough conversations, if I started it off, maybe made him get defensive, it was harder to have that conversation, right? And then, then it could build some resentment because, well, I wanted to communicate. But like you said, it's kind of hard to know where the resentment is coming from per se. So, yeah. We do have another question here, and someone else had asked this too. Just they're not coming to the same agreement about adoption. So kind of where do they go from here? And that was kind of a similar question of even changing treatments or stopping treatment, or there's just this difference of what to do next.
Yes. Okay. Great. So for this, I actually did prepare something. So I think there's a couple of really concrete. So what I might do, like if I'm seeing a couple and they come in with this, there's probably like, with any kinds of what I would call, this would be a gridlock issue. That's how I would define it. It's like we're kind of gridlocked because we both have different needs, and it's not going anywhere. We're at a gridlock. And there's a couple interventions that I thought would be useful to share with the group about that. And the reason I'm sharing the interventions, because if we're actually doing more psychotherapy, it would be a conversation with interventions a therapist would give to enhance the communication, go deeper with emotional intimacy. But for the purposes of this, I'm just going to share some things just to kind of perk your interest and idea that there are solutions. So I'm going to screen share something else. So John Gottman, who is really great, and I don't know how many of you have heard about him, but he's really great because him and his wife, Julie Gottman, are both psychologists, have been studying couples in their love lab in Seattle. So it's all evidence-based interventions, excuse me, for over 3 decades. And they can predict, I think, within 98% accuracy whether or not a couple will get divorced based on the presence of the types of conflict they have if they don't get therapy. So their methods are excellent. And so and a lot of the things I'm showing you are the things that they teach couples in order to be able to work through gridlock issues. So one of the exercises is called the art of the compromise, or the art of compromise. So the idea is you're going to look at what each person's core needs are and what each the areas of flexibility are. And each person can fill this out separately, or they could sit down and talk about it together. But I like to tell people, fill it out separately first, so it's kind of unencumbered by what you may be afraid to say or don't want to say, or feel like it might cause a conflict. So you just fill this out. And then there's this exercise, another John Gottman exercise. You can find all these things in his books, as well as the website. There's a lot of free things there called Dreams Within Conflict. And that Dreams Within Conflict is probably too big in scope to get into today, but I'm just going to throw it out there. It's an exercise that has each person write, okay, here's our gridlock. We don't know what to do about moving forward. Adoption, no adoption. But what are the dreams in that? So what are the things that we want? What's underneath that? And one of the ways, again, this is about emotional intimacy, is to move through gridlock, is to really understand what your partner's dreams are. Because so many times when people are in conflict, they're just kind of, this is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I think. There's no like kind of empathetic understanding, like deeply in your heart, like I really get where they're coming from. And once you have that shift, it's a lot easier to make decisions and solutions, and deepen your relationship at the same time. So the Dreams Within Conflict is one I'll just kind of flag that would be good to go through. If you can do it on your own, if not, you can go to a therapist. And by the way, it doesn't have to be me or anyone at my clinic. There's lots of Gottman therapists in the world, and here in Sioux Falls or in the surrounding area. So, and then what we do with this particular art of compromise is, so you again, it's a communication exercise. Help me understand your flexible areas. What do we agree about? What are our common goals? How can these be accomplished? I won't read through everything. But the idea is you kind of get this point that our compromise that honors both our needs and dreams is this. And it's not like if you're not used to doing this type of communication and processing, you're going to be able to sit down and be perfect at it. But it's something where you're going to try it once and maybe make a little tiny baby step forward. And then you can try it again. You can try it again. You can practice. And what I always tell people is, when we were growing up, in each of our families, we got into a certain level of communication skills. We learned to say please and thank you most of the time. We learned, we learned certain things, but when it comes to like really good quality communication, emotional intimacy, most of us didn't get that in our families growing up. So when you think about what it's like to teach a young person something new, they're going to feel like they don't know how to do it. So when you're learning these new communication skills, it's going to feel canned, it's going to feel unnatural, but you have to practice. And then eventually it just becomes the way you talk. It just becomes part of your couple dialogue. You don't need a worksheet anymore because you just go, hey, what's really important to you? What maybe is an area you could compromise on? It just becomes part of the way you communicate as a couple. So these exercises I'm sharing are kind of a bridge to that. But yeah, so does that, again, another broad kind of, it doesn't talk specifically about adoption, but I think people, okay, this is another distinction I'll make. A lot of times couples get lost in the weeds with the content of the discussion. So we have to talk about adoption or not adoption in order to solve this. And I think one of the biggest way to make strides is to change the process. How are we going to talk about whether to adopt?
Oh, yeah.
And so these exercises I'm giving you are more process oriented. You're not necessarily going to have you're not necessarily going to be talking just about content. It's changing the way in which we talk about it. And that's what leads to an answer. So.
Yeah. That's really powerful. Yeah, like how you said that it's not just about the content, right? Like just we need to talk about this decision, but there's more that goes to it. It's not just a simple solution that's kind of tied to that. So yeah, I think we had a couple more that popped in too here, Kimberly. I think, let's see here. Thanks to you guys for sharing your questions here too. Let's see here, Tess. Okay, so this kind of goes back to, kind of going to the different, I'd say I'm going to probably generalize, but the different personalities, right? Where we kind of talked about someone, her spouse is more upbeat, positive. This is kind of a similar situation where the husband is maybe is coming across more relaxed about the situation than she is. And so there's some frustration that's building because they're maybe approaching kind of sounds almost like the timeliness or the timing of this a little bit differently. So there's some frustration with that. So I think that maybe goes back to just how do we have that communication with them when we're handling differently, or we have different feelings, or we're processing it differently. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And this one, these are all the nuances of, I think one of the challenges, but also who cares, because this is awesome to have this conversation. But one of the challenges is not knowing the individuals. So like if I was, for example, and this is not a direct reflection on the person that asked the question, but what clinically, like my clinical antenna kind of come up whenever I'm engaged with clients, but I would say, are there other things individually? Because when you're looking at a couple, you're really looking at three entities. You're looking at partner one, partner two, and the relationship. And when we want to manage those dynamics, we have to look at all three contributions. So you could look at this purely as we have two different ways of approaching this, and how do we as a couple kind of meet each other's needs during that process. So it could be more of a relational solution, which is, how can they have different needs. Maybe the male partner is more like, let's just go with the flow. I don't want to put too much pressure on things, and my needs are we still have fun. We still, live life. I don't know, I'm hypothetical. The female partner may be like, this is really important to me, and I want to put more attention to it and, really go after it. And so we have two different approaches. And so how are we going to, as a couple, kind of negotiate and meet each other's needs? So that might be asking, like, if you can articulate those things and understand those things about why the behaviors are showing up that way, then you can say, all right, what's a couple things you need from me? Well, I need you to sit down with me and read the articles. This might be the female partner. I need you to ask me every day how I'm doing. Like, if you can identify concrete things each person needs, and then, or his might be, I just want us to go out on a date and not talk about it for one night, And if you can give those to the other person, then a lot of that'll just take care of itself, because the conflict might be showing up as a symptom of unmet needs. So that's one way to conceptualize this. Another way, so that's more of the relational solution. Another way might be, if you look at each person, perhaps someone that feels rushed may have underlying anxiety. So how could that person, and again, because I don't know anyone here, I'm not definitely not diagnosing or telling anybody what they have. I'm just kind of coming up with things that I see in my work regularly. So if like one partner has anxiety, it could be, excuse me, projected onto the situation in the other partner. And the other partner then could be reacting to that by recoiling, or it could be the case where the one partner has kind of a numbing or avoidance technique to deal with stress. And so he doesn't want to talk about it at all. And the other partner is responding by getting anxious, feeling like you're not there. So then it becomes more of like individual coping patterns that are impacting the relationship. And then to make it even trickier, it might be a combination of everything I just said. And so a lot of it is sorting out, where is it coming from? And then what are the concrete solutions? Because I think a lot of these things, finding concrete solution. Well, first, identifying the problem goes a huge way, writing the narrative, either with each other or with the therapist. And then deciding, okay, what are we going to do about it? Because I can tell you, after being a therapist for a long time, there's a lot you can do about it to make things better. It's definitely not hopeless. And again, it's an invitation so that if we figure this out now, when we actually have children, we're not going to have this issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah. And whoever asked the questions, if what I've said sparks a new question or doesn't answer your question, feel free to chime back in. So.
Yeah, no, that, like you said, identifying the problem and that's what's hard, I think, with infertility or any difficulty that a couple faces. It just magnifies the problem, right? I mean, that's what it kind of feels like, is like you said, maybe that anxiety was already there, but then infertility comes, this difficult season comes, and then it's magnified. But maybe you didn't have to identify it before because you weren't going through this difficulty, right?
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know we had another question here, kind of reclaiming intimacy and positive body image after trauma, loss, and infertility. Erin talked a little bit, but a lot of, obviously, with infertility, it's physical, right? There's a big emphasis and conversation that comes around the physical side. So what would you kind of share about that, about reclaiming intimacy and even having that positive body image and loving yourself, your body? I'm assuming this is obviously from maybe from the female perspective. Here's what it sounds like from that trauma and loss.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot in this next question. So I'm just going to kind of conceptualize it and break it down. I think there's a number of questions in there that could all be very useful for us to look at. So reclaiming intimacy, and that could be a woman's, and by intimacy, I'm assuming you mean sexual?
I'm not sure.
Because later.
Oh yeah, maybe it does sound like it could be that, and maybe even share if it's the both aspects of that, maybe, because we know intimacy can be more than just the physical side too. Yeah.
Okay, so because we haven't talked much about sex, and I did talk about the emotional side, maybe I'll focus this one on the sexual side, just to, and that obviously the emotional intimacy is part of that. So reclaiming intimacy and positive body image. So I would say those are almost, for a woman, when you're talking about, okay, so this one is complex because this is a trauma case. So when, for those of you that don't know what depersonalization is, this person said, I experienced depersonalization after my second ectopic surgery. and having a hard time being in my body. So depersonalization is a psychological coping technique by which somebody feels like they're outside of their body. It's like a disconnect. Sometimes it can be as severe as almost like you're watching yourself from above or you're watching yourself from outside. You feel detached from your body, which obviously isn't a very good way to go into being sexually intimate or even emotionally intimate, because there's not a connection to the body. And so it sounds like because of the trauma of the fertility, uh, emotionally and physically, they're created this disconnect as a way to cope with the pain of what was going on with the body and the uh, psychological and emotional experience of it. So this person did use EMDR, which is an awesome technique. Because of the severity of what I would consider the post-traumatic response, anytime somebody has depersonalization, that's kind of a clue that, I think you're going to need a little help. I would say there's things you can do the best thing you can do on your own for any kind of dissociative disorder is mindfulness meditation, because mindfulness meditation teaches you just to be with whatever's happening. And our last speaker did a meditation with us, but there's many resources. Melissa, I can share them with you too. There's a really good book called Full Catastrophe Living. My very favorite mindfulness teacher is Jack Kornfield, and he offers tons of classes online that you can take, and they're not that much money. He has free things all over his website, but he's an awesome mindfulness meditation teacher. Tara Brock is another great mindfulness meditation teacher. And those things are things you can do on your own, because it's all about learning how to find the breath, label thoughts, feelings, thoughts, emotion, physical experiences, and learn to be back in the body. So that's something you can do. But if you're having that level of dissociative response, I think that therapy would be better, because there's so much, you can get it done so much faster working with a therapist. And so in terms of the reclaiming intimacy, I mean, I could go into a lot of areas with here, but I think first working on treating the traumatic response, that dissociative is the key. And then you can work on reclaiming that sexual and emotional intimacy with yourself and your partner, either through, just spending time together and letting it happen naturally, or getting some educational materials and going through that, or seeing a therapist. And then how do you separate sex from the trauma of loss and infertility? Again, I think that's a trauma question, because anytime there's a trauma, it doesn't matter if it happens in your body because of infertility or rape or maybe a car accident or anything where your body was the source, was the scene of the crime. You have to work on healing the distortions, the cognitive distortions, the thought processes like, I'm not safe, this is my fault, whatever happens as a result of the trauma, and then all the physiological stored aspects of the trauma, which depersonalization is one, but there's lots of other ones. The fight or flight response, you've heard of that. That has to be worked through with a therapist, I would say, because once it reaches that level of like a post-traumatic response, you really do need professional help. And it's not that at that point, it's not just about infertility, it's about the fact that you went through something traumatic. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm just talking and talking, and I don't want people to get lost in what I'm saying. So if I'm going too deep in the weeds, Melissa, you need to tell me.
Well, would you maybe say, because I never thought of infertility as traumatic, so I will maybe share that. So, what would you say, or would you encourage people that is infertility traumatic? Right? I mean, is that a traumatic experience that people are going through? Because I think there is a lot of shame and guilt that gets associated with it that maybe never gets processed out because we don't realize maybe it is a traumatic experience.
It depends on the person. Over the years, I've had clients with a history of incest, and then you have a bunch of doctors regularly manually examining them. That's a complex trauma. It's not just about infertility anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
then you have people that maybe have this tremendous support system and they're talking about it all the time and they're going to therapy at the same time. And it's hard, but it's not traumatic.
Yep. Yeah.
So it depends on the person, their background, which aspects of it are going to be traumatic. You know, so yeah, and there are, I think there are a lot of cases of women that have more complex gynecological problems due to histories of sexual abuse. We know that in the literature that sexual trauma does create problems with all kinds of female reproductive health uh, things. So I would say, if that is part of somebody's past, it would be helpful to kind of consider that before going into all these very invasive procedures, and really cleaning that up and helping with that, because that can be very healing for the body as well with whatever traumas you had before.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but to answer your question, it doesn't have to meet the criteria for full PTSD, but I think it could create well, depending on what you go through as well, it could turn into that, but it would create more of a complex picture if somebody already had trauma.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So yeah, these are some great questions. I mean, this is what we wanted to have, these conversations that people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So maybe we'll ask one more. What would you kind of help kind of how to deal with grief, right? Because it seems that infertility has a lot of maybe grief associated with it, a loss of dreams or even a miscarriage. So is there anything you would kind of share with people today who are feeling like they're just dealing with a lot of grief with this journey?
Yeah. Um, you know, um, I actually did a really nice, and I can share this with you. Well, I think there's a couple ways to answer that. The only good thing about grief is that it doesn't last forever. It's different than clinical depression in that sense. Clinical depression is something that a lot of times people have to cope with lifelong, and a lot of times they can be in remission. Grief can feel like clinical depression, but it's not. It's different from a clinical standpoint. And so the best way to deal with grief is to move through it. Move through it by creating something else. Whatever that may be. Use it as an opportunity that I'm going to feel all these feelings, but keep building something. Keep building something, whatever that means to you. It could be like, what you've done, Melissa, building this incredible platform.
Mhm.
That's a really good way because your grief is about loss. And so you want to move into something that fills the hole, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And it's not just about grief with infertility. I think that's grief with everything, but you have to move through the stages. You have to move through the process. But there's something else there's a blog that we have on our website that I wrote about something called post-traumatic growth. So there's a lot of existential kind of quotes out there, and I didn't prepare this, so I can't say it off the top of my head. But the basic idea is that when one kind of has a pain that happens in life, you develop a deeper appreciation. You become more soulful. You become more tolerant. You become more wise. And so this opportunity, and there's a psychologist that studies and researches and writes about a concept called post-traumatic growth, which I think very much applies to everything that everyone here is going through, which is how can I take this experience and use it as a springboard to have a different meaning of life?
Mhm.
I'll send you that blog post as well, because
Yeah.
it's a really good way for people to conceptualize, like, I've been through this really hard thing. I'm grieving, and you're going to let the grief process, for whatever it is, play itself out. I would say, don't keep it inside. Process it with somebody, you know, your partner, a friend, a therapist. Keep moving through the stages of grief. Um, keep keep trying to find solutions, whatever those are. Even if it means I'm making the decision to stop this journey. I'm getting off the train now. And what does my life look like next? You know, because I went through this, how can I grow as a person? And how can I have a deeper understanding of what it means to be human now that I suffered?
Mhm.
And that's a beautiful thing, your ability to give to others because you went through something hard. You know, your ability to have compassion and to feel stronger. These are all wonderful gifts that suffering can bring. And so this all comes out of that model of post-traumatic growth. So
Yeah, if you could share that, that would be great. That'd be, we can either put that in the chat or I can send that to people post the event as well. So yeah,
yes,
yeah. That would be great, Kimberly. That's awesome. And thank you so much. We're getting towards the end of our time here. And just thank you so much for taking time today just to share your expertise and your knowledge and the wisdom that you have and the growth that you've experienced too, from what you've gone through. I just appreciate you sharing that with us today. Let's go ahead and we've had quite a few questions here. So what I'll maybe do, we will talk through, because I want to give away, you have your book. Where did I put my list here? It starts with the egg. Yeah, it starts with the egg by Rebecca Fett, was the book recommendation you had to share with people today. And maybe I see one name here. Let me look here. I'm just looking at my list here so we can get some people. I know Lucy, Christina, if you're still here, go ahead and just send that to Kelsey. We will get that book to you and get that mailed to you. So we appreciate you sharing that recommendation. But I did want to ask a couple rapid fire questions to get from you, Kimberly, because what one word, phrase, or Bible verse that brings you hope and encouragement?
I don't know. I'm not very good at this part. You ask me deep questions, I can go on and on, but I'm not very good with quick things. I'm like the worst, like casual conversational partner at a dinner party. I'm like, no, let's talk about something that, like, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, okay, I can think of one actually. I do ride the Peloton. I love it. It's like, for me, it's like that's full of those phrases that make you want to keep going. And one of my favorites is instructors. Hers is what makes an endurance athlete, and the answer she gives is to endure. And I think that if you're on this fertility journey, you are an endurance athlete because you are on a marathon and sometimes an ultra marathon. And so you have to learn how to just be with the pain, you know, endure, 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 and you will be an endurance athlete, or choose not to endure. But if you're going to be on the journey, to kind of have that mindset that I'm going to endure this and I'm going to learn how, and I'm going to do it with positive self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to coach myself, you know, that I can do it.
Yeah. Oh, I like that quote. That was very good. I like that. Yeah, and I like Peloton too. We've joined that group. I like to do the yoga on there is one of the other things we like to do too, besides the bike stuff. But yeah, well, awesome, Kimberly. Thank you so much, you guys. Let's give her some love. Share. Oh, well, let's do this. Sorry, I forgot to mention this. How can people find you, Kimberly, if they want to continue this conversation, or even if they would want to book a session with you? How can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything is on your website, but it's just my name, KimberlyKeiser.com. You can go, we have extensive library of blogs, posts, information, education. We're starting a webinar series in February that I'm sure is going to develop over the years, but you know, I love to just be a resource. So if anybody here wants to email me and just ask a question, you don't have to become my patient. You know, you can just say, hey, you mentioned this in the talk. Can you tell me where to find it? Or, you know, I'm here to be a resource and I'm happy to help. So and my email is just Kimberly@KimberlyKeiser.com, which you can also find on the website. So.
Perfect. No, that's great. And if you guys have any questions today, feel free to email me. I know many of you have emailed me, but I can always connect you too. If you wanted to have had another question or had something that they talked about, any of the speakers talked about today, I can make sure to connect them with you too, Kimberly. So yeah, well, let's, like I said, give her some love, give her some claps, hands, put something in the chat, let her know how much you appreciate her sharing her time today. I'm so thankful, Kimberly. We have a couple of your free resources that are, Kelsey put a link to that. It's a Google Drive that all of our attendees can access. And then we can always follow up with the blog post too that you had shared. I'm really curious to listen to that one as well, or to read that blog post too. So that'd be
Yeah, awesome. All right, thank you, everyone.